This is Fantology.
You may have heard of us.
All right, what's up, Chapel of Holy Expediency? This is Stephen, your host with Phantology Podcast, and I have my lifelong friend Jake here with me, and we're talking about The Devils by Joe Abercrombie. This book comes out in May. It's highly anticipated. I've actually already done a booktube review for it where, well, I guess we'll get to that in a second for my review, but this is going to be no spoilers more than just like what you'd see on a book blurb, enough where we can talk about it. So, even if you're pretty spoiler sensitive, I think you'll be okay tuning in and just kind of getting hyped for this book.
Yeah, you'd only not want to listen to this if you're planning on going in blind, and you're probably actively hiding anything that mentioned the devils if that's how you're going into
Yeah.
it. So,
Yeah, if that's your attitude, you probably have not even clicked on this episode at all.
yeah. Yeah.
So first of all, like, what is it? We know Joe Abercrombie from his first Law books and the Shattered Sea books, which actually I haven't read his YA series, but
Me
mostly
either.
the first Law. And he's Lord Grimdark on Twitter, and he's kind of got this reputation. And he's one of my very favorite fantasy authors. I think you as well, Jake.
Same.
And
Yeah.
this is a new series, and so there's a lot of excitement around this book. It's been a little bit since Wisdom of Crowds came out. He's been working on this for some time. And so I think it's pretty highly anticipated. And a lot of people are like, it's not first law. What are we expecting? And so maybe I'll just read the book blurb and then we'll kind of give our takes on it. And by the way, if it wasn't clear, we've both already read the book thanks to an arc. And so um, you know, our we read it fairly recently and we both enjoyed it. I guess we'll get to our full review in a second. So the blurb. Holy work sometimes requires unholy deeds. Brother Diaz has been summoned to the sacred city where he is certain a commendation and grand holy assignment awaits him. But his new flock is made up of unrepentant murderers, practitioners of ghastly magic, and outright monsters. And the mission he is tasked with will require bloody measures from them all in order to achieve its righteous ends. Elves lurk at our borders and hunger for our flesh, while greedy princes care for nothing but their own ambitions and comfort. With a hellish journey before him, it's a good thing Brother Diaz has the devils on his side. That's from Goodreads.
Yeah, it's a pretty good blurb, I'd say. Uh yeah, I don't know how I'm trying to like not dive into any spoilers, but yeah, it's a kind of like that blurb explains. It's a fun kind of romp-ish, you
Yeah,
know. Um, there's gonna be, I feel like a lot of people are gonna compare it to Suicide Squad. Um,
it's easy. Yeah, easy comparison. Or
but
Thunderbolts, which seems like the same vibe, which is coming out later this year. Actually,
which
it'll
I
be
think,
coming out in
yeah.
May as well, right? So back to
Oh, nice.
back,
Yeah.
yeah, missions with groups of devils.
I will say it didn't feel the same as Suicide Squad to me. It felt much more epic and um a little less um bleak. I mean I mean it is, I would still consider it grimdark for sure,
Mhm.
but it felt less like a suicide mission. Like there definitely, I wasn't sure who was going to survive at any given moment, but I feel like Suicide Squad in general is more like who's who's like you
It's
think
in the
most
name.
people are going to die.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, basically. Whereas this, yeah, um, yeah, really, I'm trying to think of other ways to describe it. It did feel a little. This could be because I've been listening to so many Abercrombie interviews recently, specifically around the Devils. But it did kind of have like the swashbuckling adventure that you'd expect from like a Indiana Jones, I'd say. I don't know,
Okay.
is that track for you as well? Um
Yeah, I mean, there's one scene that felt like it could have been straight out of like a Pirates of the Caribbean
that's
type
true.
of
Yeah.
adventure, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, very much an adventure
Yeah.
fantasy. type of thing. It's a quest fantasy where, Brother Diaz kind of gathers his group of devils and off they go on their mission. And that's basically the plot. They go through and face a bunch of obstacles and twists along the way. And as far as like the plot and what you're expecting, like it's a fairly straightforward type of story, but much fun and nefarious things happen along the way, and that's what keeps you reading.
Yeah, I do. We've talked about this, and I'm not jumping into my review right away, but I think Steve and I would both say that this is one of his strongest starts in a series. Um, I think probably one of his best other first books in a series would be the first book in Age of Madness, but I don't know if that counts really because you have all of the first law established with
Yeah,
what 6 books before that. So
A Little Hatred. Yeah, was
um,
really good. But yeah, I
really
know what you're
good.
saying.
But this one is even more, like this is your first introduction. I think it's done really well. It's an alternate history Europe, which when I first heard that, I was a little hesitant about. I feel like alternate history can quickly either be boring or I don't know. Like it's like
Mm,
it's a fine line to tread between like I want my fantasy, but also like if this is real world, how
yeah.
are you going to make that work? And I think it does work fairly well. I think he does a
Why
really
do
good
you
job at
think why do you think he said it? Like he could have come up with a fantasy world, right?
Yeah.
But why choose there's a lot of real historical events. It kind of takes place in, a medieval-esque time period, and Troy has not fallen in the eastern and western. It's the eastern part of the church, and there's this conflict between the two. And throughout, you'll hear all these references to things that are sometimes like myths from real history or sorry, myths from what we are familiar with that are like real history in their time. And the blurb mentioned elves, and elves are these like supposedly bloodthirsty enemies. And you know, we'll see. Honestly, that's kind of I
They're kind
think,
of described
yeah,
if you've read The Daughter's War, like they're kind of
mm,
described like the biters and that same sense of fear and like
yeah,
loathing and threatening. Um yeah, so why do alternate history? Why not just be
right,
completely new?
right,
That's a good question. I think it's either got to be because of those myths, like there's parts of our history that like are basically just mythologized at this point. Like what do we really know about a
mm,
lot of this stuff is like lost to history. And so it's a way to dive into that in a fantastical way. I I I would love to ask him that. I think probably what seems to be the main reason for him from my point of view is just because of all like the how big like the Catholicism slash like ancient Christian church
yeah.
is in
The
this.
ability
Like I
to
feel
to
like
make some religious commentary that's like really interesting and relevant.
yeah, and I don't even I mean definitely for the commentary, but also just because like it's done in a fun and interesting way. Whereas trying to think if he built it in his own fantasy world and he built it the same way to pull off the same things he does in this, then it would kind of feel like, oh, this is just like a carbon copy. Whereas because it's an alternate history, it's like, oh, this is what it is, but this is just a different like
Right,
variation
right.
of it. Um, so I don't know, there's that. I don't know, like alternate history can be so tricky because as a reader, you have so much context into the real history. And so you're constantly like, wait, did this historical event happen in this timeline too? You know what I mean? Like it's got, it can be really off-putting to do that. It can kind of cause stumbling, in my opinion. But I think it was done really well. I ended up, like I said, I went in hesitant over the alternate history thing, but I ended up really liking it. And it made me fascinated. It made me want to like read more about ancient Europe because there's some things that are like a bigger deal in this book than they are in our history and real
Mm.
history. And so it'd be interesting to learn more about like was this like a possibility at some point to have this same type of influence later on or not? But
Mm. I think it also allows you to really hit the ground running pretty quickly. He doesn't have to
yeah.
waste words building up a new world and a new religion and everything. It's we're already familiar with all these elements. So, and this is a really fast-paced book. So it seems like it'd be hard to make the plot quite as engaging and the pacing, you know, hit nearly as hard if we're spending chapters like, oh, here's the lore of blah blah, and there is a little bit of that, but it's interwoven really well, and it allows just the story to just take off and like really never stop.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thinking of the first law, like you could that could have been an alternate history. Like everything in there is analogous to something like pretty one to one. It's not that I'm saying he was writing it as an allegory at all, but like the Union
Mm,
is basically Great Britain slash Greater Western Europe. The North is untamed Scandinavia. The old empire, you could say was like the Byzantine Empire or maybe the Roman Empire in general. And
mm.
yeah, you know what I mean. So there's like
Yeah,
the
Gurkel is
Gir-
kind of
some
like
Eastern Empire, maybe
yeah,
Persia. Yeah. Um,
mm.
anyway,
Or
so
maybe
so you
like kind
could
of like the Moors in Spain, almost
or
like
that,
that.
yeah.
Yeah. Mm,
So you could just he could have done that for that as well. But Um, yeah, I don't it does make it very distinct from his previous works as well in a
mm.
good way, like a distinguishing way. Um,
Plus, it allows for
and
humor. Like, it's a
it does. Yeah.
really easy way to sneak some humor in there. Like there are at least two or three jokes about how much England sucks, which, he's obviously
Yeah.
British. I just, those types of things. He sneaks in enough of it, but without it being too on the nose. But it's quite funny to read through.
Yeah. Yeah, lots of humor. I think his humor it like really shines in this book. It is a different, almost a different sense of humor. Most of his humor in previous books was a lot darker, and there is still that dark sense of humor throughout. But there's also just more bombastic stuff that's just like goofy in a good way, where you're just
Mhm.
there's a couple scenes coming to mind right now where I'm just like I know he was like busting himself up, right, writing these scenes. But
Let's talk about those two elements. So one, it's like grimdark, but not quite as grimdark as
I
First Law, in my
yeah,
opinion. And two, there's like this zaniness to
there is a
parts of
zaniness.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think the zaniness is what cuts the edge of a lot of the grimdark and why some people will
Mm,
not consider it grimdark. I think it depends on like what that definition is. If you're thinking more of a Malazan definition of grimdark, I don't think it really adds up to that. And I don't even know if Abercrombie's other works really fit that version of
yeah.
it. But I think it still, without going to any spoilers, it still very much has his signature version of like you don't like happy endings aren't really like in the cards for everybody's story arc, like good things are fleeting. You expect to be
Mm.
disappointed in that type of way. Um, so I think for in that regard, I would still consider it grimdark, but with
But I will
some
say, I mean, there's less of a in the First Law, it's kind of like no one can change, no one can feel empathy. There's really no hope for anything better to ever happen.
people do
And
people do
I,
change in first law though. It's a struggle. It's hard, but it happens.
I mean, but it's always kind of like, do they, or are they just going to continue to be backslide once again after?
I think there's um not going into any spoilers, but Shivers, like I think a prime
Okay,
example of some
sure.
change there.
Yeah, yeah.
um Rika, also a lot of change. Um Orso as well.
Okay.
Um
Okay. Well, okay, okay. Okay. Maybe I'll
Sabine. or however you say Sabina. I don't know how you
Yeah, I guess I'll walk it back a little bit, but there's just like this absence of hope in general, and
yeah.
I don't know. Things are colored much darker, and I think this book we're able to have more of a nuanced take on like what is good and evil. Are these devils really that evil? What is it that makes someone bad? And I thought it was done really well, where it wasn't heavy-handed. He's not like Abercrombie's not telling you his take on it, but it allows for some like really interesting thinking on the subject. And I mean, obviously the discussion of good versus evil is not a new discussion, but I thought the approach to it was pretty well done.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I guess to your point, I could see a lot of people not really considering this Grimdark anymore. I think it hits a lot of those tragic, bittersweet things that his other works have in a similar way for me, but maybe not to the same degree. So sorry about the cough. But yeah, maybe not quite as grim of the dark. I did hear that he's trying to move away from that moniker of Lord Grimdark. Um,
I think he's always kind of thought that that was a little harsh way to describe his books, honestly.
yeah. Well, I in one of the interviews I listened to, they mentioned his Blue Sky account, and he's not Lord Grimdark on there. He's like Joe Abercrombie books or something like that. And
Hmm.
someone mentioned like in the interview, they're like, "Oh, not Lord Grimdark," and he was like, "Yeah, I'm kind of stepping away from that title a bit." But um, I think the zaniness uh cuts a lot of that edge. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, I'm excited to see what happens next. Um,
Seems like it's definitely a series. I'm guessing it's a trilogy. I don't really know. I don't know. Did he ever address that in the interviews you listened to?
yeah, he said something, and I think this was the Tudor Ramble interview. It might have been a different one. He said, depending on how well it does, he's planning on writing more, but they'd feel more disconnected. He specifically mentioned like the Indiana Jones movies. And so I don't know if that's going to feel more like his standalone works or somewhere in
Oh,
between
interesting.
standalones and sequels. Um,
So
so
maybe
that's
not like immediate timeline following one after another.
yeah,
I could see that.
the
Okay.
the
Yeah.
vibe I got from that after reading the book was that it would be kind of like here are the devils again, and whether it's the same cast of devils or not, or maybe one or two are
Mm,
the same. Um, yeah. So somewhere I'm kind of thinking somewhere in between a sequel and a another standalone in the way he did those.
interesting.
Um,
Okay.
like a little more continuity and more thematic continuity of still following the devils, but maybe not. Maybe he's planning on following different characters completely,
Mm,
or different plot points. Like maybe I don't know how many times could I read about a group of devils again?
yeah.
I don't know.
I
We'll
mean,
see.
I probably could. Like, honestly, just his writing and humor alone is enough to
Yeah.
get me to read probably any story that he tells. And with I guess we can kind of like go into like ratings territory, but one of the weaknesses to the first law that people usually touch on is they feel like the plot is fairly straightforward, and there's it's not nearly like the intricacies of a Brandon Sanderson type plot with twists here and there and everywhere. And that's still the case here, but honestly, everything else is just done so well that it doesn't really bother me.
I thought plot wise, this is probably his most direct, cohesive, like like everyone talks about First Law having like no plot, and I think that's warranted to a degree. It does set up a lot, and so that's fine as being part of a series.
Or you mean
But
the
even
blade
this,
itself?
sorry, the blade itself, yeah, for the First Law.
Hmm.
Whereas this one, even though knowing there's likely to be more, like it feels like from the get-go, like you said, it's super fast-paced, and I don't see that as a weakness of this at all. But yeah, it and I thought, I don't know, the action set pieces were amazing. The action scenes were
Yeah.
amazing. Like, and the character, like, I yeah, it has 8 like POVs, I think, throughout. And I will
There are
say
seven, so there's 8 devils and 7 POVs because
7 POVs.
one of them
Okay.
doesn't get a POV. But yeah, so
And
that's a
he
lot of POVs.
I will say I think probably the hardest thing he had to do was figure out how to juggle uh not just the POVs but like featuring every member of the cast in some way. I do think
Mm.
one member in particular was kind of left behind a bit. And
Mm.
so if you like if I think if you broke it down more like mathematically, you could say like this is a weakness for that reason. But
Mm.
the characters the characters that were stronger had the most time and the most focus, and I think that carried the book. Yeah. I mean, in your book to review, you said it's the best Joe Abercrombie book ever. Do you
Yeah, that's what I said.
you made that review 2 months ago? So
Yeah, 1 month ago.
1 month ago. So how do you
Yeah.
are you sticking with it? What do you think?
Yeah, I'm
And if
sticking with it.
so, why?
I gave it a 9 out of 10 in that review, and I feel like that is where I'm gonna stay. And other reviews have
And
started coming out, and I feel like they've mostly validated my opinion. Some big booktubers have given it 5 stars, and there was one that came out that was like 1 star, which was just weird. Then I disagreed with like all of his points. But
yeah.
anyway, I mean, I think it's gonna
Same.
be, I think people are gonna like it quite a bit. And as I was preparing for this, I was thinking, like, how can I justify saying it's my favorite Abercrombie? Like, what is it that takes it over the top of all of his other books? Because all of the same elements are there, and I think everything is. It's really hard to say like his writing is better than before. Like, yeah, it's it's always been good. Like, how can you really quantify that or fairly rate that? But the thing for me, and I touched on this before, is I just think when this book was over, I thought back on it and I like considered some of these moral quandaries and like questions and things that he set up really well. And I just thought they were very interesting and like well done and nuanced. And I don't know if I've had that same type of thinking about his other books. Like they've been entertaining and they've definitely had themes and things to bring up. But I guess the things I look back on at least are like the twists and the like who this character was or like this big action or whatever or like this like crazy violent thing that happened. But this one I think back on just like, are these characters good or bad, or like how does that even work in the world? And anyway, that is just interesting stuff to think about, and I think that like takes it over the top.
That's interesting to me. I think I would probably rate it an 8 or 9 out of 10 as well. But I do like man, I can't what is the name of the last Age of Madness book?
Wisdom
What's
of
that one called?
Crowds.
Wisdom of Crowds. I think that one is probably my favorite Abercrombie.
Mm.
That one and the Heroes. Um, I think I like those a little. I feel the inverse actually. Like I thought this was like a really fun romp. It felt so much like every time I was reading a scene, I was like, I want to be playing this D&D campaign right now. It's like
Uh,
structured in such a way where it feels like that's what it could
yeah.
be, and I'm like, am I going to completely rip off this book and homebrew a campaign that is exactly this? Because
There were 4 massive set piece actions throughout, and then
yeah,
just a lot of connective tissue between the two, or between the set pieces, and obviously the characters are growing as it all goes along. But yes, each one of those felt like they could have been really fun to D&D play.
yeah, and like I mean, you're following this party basically. Everyone's got their strengths and weaknesses, and like, anyways,
Hmm.
the fun level was probably more fun than most of his books in that way. But I felt like the Heroes and Age of Madness in general, but specifically Wisdom of Crowds, I felt like those ones were more had me
Mm.
thinking about things deeper afterwards than this one
Okay.
did. Not to say I didn't think that was a weakness in this book. It just wasn't one of my takeaways. So it's interesting. We got different things out of it.
I mean, definitely part of it could have been there's been some time since reading those, and like that you mentioned the heroes, the theme of the heroes is like these people are heroes, but are they? And
and and just the
it's kind of the
critique of like
inverse.
war and violence,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah, for sure. And yeah, and I don't know, maybe in my as I've gotten older and my literary chops and tastes have increased in my wisdom, I think more about these themes instead of just like previously reading stuff to enjoy the action. I don't know. But anyway, I there was a lot to think back on after this was over. I also really liked the commentary on religion. I thought it was done like really fairly in a way where some characters were religious and they had reasons for being, and they had arguments like for religion in general, and there are others who are like not, and they had arguments for not being, and there was no heavy hand in him saying like
Yeah.
this is how it is. It's just kind of like, here's how different people think and like make of it what you will.
Yeah, and specifically there is a character that kind of has a come to Jesus moment a little bit
Yeah.
in the plot. That was that added an interesting element to those themes, like you were saying. Um, yeah, I think Prose super fun, well written, really funny, great action, and I love the characters. Like the main character, I don't know. For me, the main character was Alex. I loved her character. Like I think they did it so well. I felt so much for her. I guess you could say Brother Diaz is the main character too, and I
I
liked
think,
him.
yeah, those two were probably
I
the
liked
mains.
his arc, and but like uh Viga, like I don't know, like there, I just felt so, you just feel so much. Like Abercrombie's character work has always been great, and I think it's top tier in this. Um, I
And in
think
this,
so,
even not all the characters are human and they're inhuman in like some very radical ways, but they still like have so much humanity to them.
yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, thinking back to our discussions of Murderbot, like what makes you a person, you know, like there's a lot of that similar theme of like, despite actual levels of humanity, like how much humanity do you have? I think you could say the pacing could throw some people off because it has a similar structure to Best Served Cold, where there's like so many things that
Yeah.
have to happen, and then but I feel like this one is paced better than Best Served Cold. I really like Best Served Cold as well, but I think the pacing on this one didn't seem um it didn't seem that like stepwise to me.
hmm
Uh,
It seemed like
that
everything
other
happened very naturally. I will say, like, the main critique I have for the whole book is I felt like about three-quarters of the way through, there was like a really significant slowdown for an extended amount
Mhm.
of time. And we can talk about it in the spoiler section. Like, it makes sense why, but at the same time, like, the pacing's like really humming along until like kind of comes to
Yeah.
a halt for a while.
Yeah. And even for me, for that part, the pacing was really just slow for certain characters. Like it was during that same stretch, certain POVs I was really interested to keep going back to.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, and then I thought he stuck the landing. There's some fun twist to it, some great setup for the world to continue.
hmm
And yeah,
Say one really good twist, one like very obvious twist.
yeah, yeah. What?
I guess we'll talk about it in the
Yeah,
spoiler section, but
there's little meta commentary in the book itself about the twist too, which I thought was
yeah,
funny.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. And then there is a broken binding edition coming out. The art looks pretty cool. Um,
yeah.
stay away if you don't want any spoilers, I'd say maybe. But it's not like plot details, but just some,
Oh, with the artwork.
yeah, maybe, I don't know. I just
I
know some
mean,
people are so sensitive to like seeing
yeah,
anything.
there's like, yeah, there's two or three really cool depictions of some of the big action pieces. So you'll
Yeah.
get kind of like the vibe of, but I don't know. I don't think you're gonna know what's going on if you haven't read the book. Like,
Yeah.
I, yeah, I doubt many people are gonna feel spoiled by that. But yeah, if you are interested in that Broken Binding edition, then check out their Twitter for all the details there. You have to be like on that to score a copy because those things go super fast.
Yeah, I'm curious how much they're going to be. Hopefully more affordable, but
Oh, they're already like the prices are announced. They're like,
oh, is it?
yeah, the company's in England, so they're priced in pounds, but I think the books to US dollars are like 40-ish bucks, and then
Oh,
with
that's
the
not bad.
shipping, you got to pay international shipping, so I
Like
think it comes out to
60.
like it's like 50 or 60 overall.
Yeah. Still not bad. I'm just so disappointed looking at like Malazan special editions and they're like 300 a copy and I'm like I'm never getting any of these. But
Yeah, well, there's a reason for that, but that requires a
yeah.
much longer explanation than we have time for on this
Yeah.
podcast. So yeah,
But yeah,
hopefully, hopefully we've hyped you up a bit. We both really enjoyed the book, and it's going to be one of the most anticipated of the year. I think rightfully so. There's always a few nitpicks here and there, but I think most people are really going to enjoy reading the book.
don't listen to Jason Furman's review of it. Actually, you can listen to it. He kind of goes into some spoilers, but he's the one who gave it 1 out of 5. I feel like most of his criticism was just completely out there. So get hyped. It's really fun.
Yeah.
New Abercrombie, and it's really great. So
Releases May something. Dang, we should have had the release date pulled up. If you're excited enough for it, that's a Google away to find
yeah,
that
that's to
release
help you
date.
feel more engaged.
Yes.
I'll Google it
Yeah.
real quick.
Little challenge there for the listener. When's the actual release date?
Yeah.
But we're gonna roll right into now a recording of our full spoiler, which will release the week of the
May
book.
6th.
Okay, we'll release that
Week of May
on
6th.
May 7th. I don't know, sometime shortly afterwards. So if you liked this review, tune in to that one for a more complete breakdown of some of our thoughts. And if you want to check out more of what we're doing at Phantology, you can join our Discord. Invites are in the episode description below. All right, Chapel of Holy Expediency. See you later.
Yeah.